Not a finite arena. Welcome to the stream. Today's stream is going to be a little bit different than what we usually cover on this channel. Today, rather than my usual gaming stream, we will be covering the works of the author H.P. Lovecraft. We'll be starting today with The Beast in the Cave. Beyond that, we may go into The Color Out of Space, though I highly doubt it. That might be a stream on of its own, just considering how long it is. That said, I may just continue on and read a different story a little bit later in the works of his, The Doomed That Came to Sarnath. It is another one of my good favorites, at least among his catalog. But at the very least, I suspect we will have The Beast in the Cave and The Alchemist done, if nothing else. It depends on how long it takes for me to read these, but I'll try to have these out in a good, nice fashion. Let me put some calming music on. I didn't prepare any, but it's probably a good time to do so now. No. I don't know, that's not really quite right. Let's see. Definitely not stuff that's so short either. Trying to find something that we can use. Maybe this will be fun. Let's move it on to... And that is really loud. I can lower... Oh wait, desktop audio says it's not that loud. Let me turn this up. Yes, I am, let me compare this. Okay, yeah, that doesn't sound so loud on your guys' side. I'll just turn down my own headphones and hopefully that'll work. But yes, I'm reading some Lovecraft tonight. So yeah, let's get right into it. You can see I even created a little background for reading today. Right, so I'm going to get over to the first story. There's a bit of an introduction here before it. The Beast in the Cave by H.P. Lovecraft. A horrible conclusion, which had been gradually obtruding itself upon my confused and reluctant mind, was now an awful certainty. I was lost, completely, hopelessly lost in the vast labyrinthine recesses of the Mammoth Cave. Turn as I might, in no direction could my straining vision seize on any object capable of serving as a guidepost to set me on the outward path. That never more should I behold the blessed light of day, or scan the pleasant hills and dales of the beautiful world outside. My reason could no longer entertain the slightest unbelief. Hope had departed. Yet, intoxicated as I was by a life of philosophical study, I derived no small measure of satisfaction from my unimpassioned demeanor. For although I had frequently read of the wild fantasies into which were thrown the victims of similar situations, I had experienced none of these, but stood quiet as soon as I clearly realized the loss of my bearings. Nor did the thought that I had probably wandered beyond the utmost limits of an ordinary search cause me to abandon my composure even for a moment. If I must die, I reflected, then this terrible yet majestic cavern as welcome tomb, as that which may be any churchyard, as which any churchyard may afford. A conception which carried with it more of tranquility than of despair. Starving would prove my ultimate fate. Of this I was certain. Some, I knew, had gone mad under circumstances such as these, but I felt that this end would not be mine. My disaster was the result of no fault save my own, since, unbeknownst to the guide, I had separated myself from the regular party of sightseers, and, wandering for an hour in forbidden avenues of the cave, had found myself unable to retrace the devious wanderings which I had pursued since forsaking my companions. Already my torch had begun to expire. Soon I would be enveloped by the total, almost palpable darkness of the bowels of the earth. As I stood in the waning, unsteady light, I idly wondered over the exact circumstances of my coming end. I remembered the accounts which I had heard of the colony of consumptives who, taking their residence in this gigantic grotto to find health from the apparently sulphurous air of the underground world, with its steady, uniform temperature, pure air, and peaceful quiet, had found instead death in strange and ghastly form. I had seen the sad remains of their ill-made cottages as I passed them by with the party, and had wondered what unnatural influence a long sojourn in this immense and silent cavern would exert upon one as healthy and vigorous as I. Now, I grimly told myself, an opportunity for settling this point had arrived, provided that want for food should not bring me too speedy a departure from this life. As the last fitful of rays from my torch faded into obscurity, I resolved to leave no stone unturned, no possible means of escape neglected. So, summoning all the powers possessed in my lungs, I set up a series of loud shoutings, in the vain hope of attracting the attention of the guide by my clamor. Yet, as I called, I believed in my heart that my cries were to no purpose, and that my voice, magnified and reflected by the numerous ramparts of the black maze about me, fell upon no ears save my own. All at once, however, my attention was fixed with a start as I fancied that I heard a sound of soft approaching steps on the rocky floor of the cavern. Was my deliverance about to be accomplished so soon? Had then my horrible apprehensions been for naught? And was the guide, having marked my unwarranted absence from the party, following my course in seeking me out in this limestone labyrinth? Whilst those joyful queries rose in my brain, I was on the point of renewing my cries, in order that my discovery may come the sooner, when, in an instant, my delight was turned to horror, as I listened, for my ever-acute ear, now sharpened in even greater degree by the complete silence of the cave, bore to my unbenumbed understanding the unexpected and dreadful knowledge that these footfalls were not like those of any mortal man, and the unearthly stillness of the subterranean region, the thread of the booted guide would have sounded like a series of sharp and indecisive blows. These impacts were soft and steady, as of the padded paws of some feline. Besides, at times, when I listened carefully, I seemed to trace the falls of 4 instead of 2 feet. I was now convinced that I had, by my cries, aroused and attracted some wild beast, perhaps a mountain lion, which had accidentally strayed within the cave. Perhaps, I considered, the Almighty had chosen for me a swifter and more merciful death than that of hunger. Yet, the instinct of self-preservation, never wholly dormant, was stirred in my breast, and, though escape from the oncoming peril might but spare me for a sterner and more lingering end, I determined nevertheless to part with my life at as high a price as I could command. Strange as it may seem, my mind conceived of no ill intent on the part of the visitor, save for that of hostility. Accordingly, I became very quiet, in the hope that the unknown beast would, in the absence of a guiding sound, lose its direction as had I, and thus pass me by. But this hope was not destined for realization, for the strange footfall steadily advanced, the animal evidently having obtained my scent, which, in an atmosphere so absolutely free from all distracting influence as that of the cave, could doubtless be followed at any great distance. Seeing, therefore, that I must be armed for defense against an uncanny and unseen attack in the dark, I groped around me for the largest of the fragments of rock, which were sown upon all parts of the floor of the cavern and the vicinity, and, grasping one in each hand for immediate use, awaited with resignation the inevitable result. Meanwhile, the hideous pattering of paws drew near. Certainly the conduct of the creature was exceedingly strange. Most of the time, the tread seemed to be that of a quadruped, walking with a singular lack of unison betwixt hind and forefeet. Yet, at brief and infrequent intervals, I fancied that but 2 feet were engaged in the process of locomotion. I wondered what species of animal was to confront me. It must, I thought, be some unfortunate beast who had paid for its curiosity to investigate one of the entrances of the fearful grotto, with a lifelong confinement in its interminable recesses. Oh man, as I go on longer, this gets harder to read. And doubtless obtained as food the eyeless fish, bats, and rats of the cave, as well as some of the ordinary fish that are wafted in at every freshet of Green River, which communicates in some occult manner with the waters of the cave. I occupied my terrible vigil with grotesque conjectures of what alterations cave life might have wrought in the physical structure of the beast, remembering the awful appearances ascribed by the local tradition to the consumptives who had died after long residence in the cave. I'm going to have to look up that word later to make sure I'm not saying something bad. I probably should have realized that beforehand. Whatever, we'll continue. Then I remembered with a start that even should I succeed in killing my antagonist, I should never behold its form, for my torch had long since been extinct, and I was entirely unprovided with matches. The tension on my brain had now become frightful. My disordered fancy conjectured up hideous and fearsome shapes from the sinister darkness that surrounded me, and that actually seemed to press upon my mind. Nearer the dreaded footfalls approached. It seemed that I must give vent to a piercing scream, yet I had been sufficiently irresolute to attempt such a thing. My voice could scarce have responded. I was petrified, rooted to the spot. I doubted if my right arm would allow me to hurl its missile at the oncoming thing when the crucial moment should arrive. Now, steadily, pat-pat of now the steady pat-pat of the steps was close at hand. Now, very close, I could hear the labored breathing of the animal, and terror-struck as I was, I realized that it must have come from a considerable distance, and was correspondingly fatigued. Suddenly, the spell broke. My right hand, guided by my ever-trustworthy sense of hearing, threw with full force the sharp-angled bit of limestone which it contained, toward that point in the darkness from which emitted the breathing and pattering, and, wonderful to relate, it nearly reached its goal, for I heard the thing jump, and landing a distance away, where it seemed to pause. Sorry. Having readjusted my aim, I discharged my second missile. This time, most effectively, for, with a flood of joy, I listened as the creature fell in what sounded like a complete collapse, and, evidently remaining prone and unmoving, Almost overpowered by a great relief which rushed over me, I reeled back against the wall. The breathing continued, in heavy, gasping inhalations and expirations, whence I realized that I had no more than wounded the creature, and now all desire to examine the thing ceased. At last, something aligned to groundless, superstitious fear had entered my brain, and I did not approach the body, nor did I continue to cast stones in it in order to complete the execution of its life. Instead, I ran full speed in what was, as nearly as I could estimate, in my frenzied condition, the direction from which I had come. Suddenly, I heard a sound, or rather, a regular succession of sounds. In another instant, they had resolved themselves into a series of sharp, metallic clicks. This time, there was no doubt. It was the guide. And then I shouted, yelled, screamed, even shrieked with joy as I beheld, and the vaulted arches above the faint and glimmering engulfings which I had known to be the reflected light of an approaching torch. I was lying upon the ground at the feet of the guide, embracing his boots and gibbering, despite my boasted reserve, in a most meaningless and idiotic manner, pouring out my terrible story, and at the same time overwhelming my auditor with protestations of gratitude. At length I awoke to something like my normal consciousness. The guide had noted my absence upon the arrival of the party at the entrance of the cave, and had, from his own intuitive sense of direction, proceeded to make a thorough canvass of the passages just ahead of where he had last spoken to me, locating my whereabouts Locating my whereabouts after a quest of about 4 hours. Let me reposition myself really quick here. Right. I can just turn this off because I don't need to have chat up on that. I can just keep it up on this because I'm not playing anything. Right. By the time he had related this to me, I, emboldened by his torch and his company, began to reflect upon the strange beast which I had wounded but a short distance back in the darkness. I suggested that we ascertain, by the rushlight's aid, what manner of creature was my victim. Accordingly, I retraced my steps, this time with courage born of companionship, to the scene of my terrible experience. Soon, descried, I guess is how you're supposed to say that. Soon we descried a white object upon the floor, an object whiter even than the glimmering limestone itself. Cautiously advancing, we gave vent to a stimulus. Oh God, that's so bad now. Let me just read it though. Cautiously advancing, we gave vent to a stimulus ejaculation of wonderment. For of all the unnatural monsters either of us had in our lifetimes beheld, this was in surprising degree the strangest. It appeared to be an anthropoid ape of large portions, escaping, perhaps, some internate mingrate? I don't know. Its hair was snow white, a thing due, no doubt, to the bleaching action of a long experience within the inky confines of the cave. But it was surprisingly thin, being indeed largely absent save on the head, where it was of such length and abundance that it fell over the shoulders in considerable profusion. The face was turned away from us, as the creature lay almost directly upon it. The inclining of the limbs was very singular, explaining, however, the alteration in their use which I had before noted, whereby the beast used sometimes all four, and on other occasions but two for its progress. From the tips of the fingers or toes, long nail-like claws extended. The hands or feet were not prehensile. In fact, I ascertained that ascertained too that long residence in the cave, which, as I before mentioned, seemed evident from the all-pervading and almost unearthly whiteness so characteristic of the whole autonomy. No tail seemed to be present. If it's an ape, there shouldn't be one, which I think he calls it. Let me double check here. Just because I'm not going to remember to bring this up when we go over reviewing it. The respiration had now grown very feeble, and the guide had drawn his pistol with the evident intent of dispatching the creature, when a sudden sound emitted by the latter caused the weapon to fall unused. The sound was of a nature difficult to describe. It was not like the normal note of any known species of simian, and I wondered if this unnatural quality were not the result of a long, continued, and complete silence, broken by the sensations produced by the advent of the light, a thing which the beast could not have seen since its first entrance into the cave. The sound, which I might feebly attempt to classify as a deep-toned chattering, was faintly continued. All at once, a fleeting spasm of energy seemed to pass through the frame of the beast. The paws went through a convulsive motion, and the limbs contracted. With a jerk, the white body rolled over so that its face was turned in our direction. For a moment, I was so struck with horror at the eyes thus revealed that I noted nothing else. They were black, those eyes, deep, jet black, in hideous contrast to the snow-white hair and flesh. Like those of other cave denizens, they were deeply shrunken in their orbits and were entirely destitute of iris. As I looked more closely, I saw that they were set on the face of a less prognosis than that of the average ape, and infinitely more hairy. The nose was quite distinct. As we gazed upon the uncanny sight pressing to our vision, the thick lips opened and several sounds issued from them, after which the thing relaxed in death. The guide clutched my coat sleeve and trembled so violently that the light shook fitfully, casting weird, moving shadows on the walls about us. I made no motion, but stood rigidly still, my horrified eyes fixed upon the floor ahead. Then fear left, and wonder, awe, compassion, and reverence succeeded in its place, for the sounds uttered by the stricken figure that lay stretched out on the limestone had told us the awesome truth. The creature I had killed, the strange beast of the unfathomed cave, was, or had at one time been, a man. So, I feel that reveal isn't a very good one, because it seemed very, the only thing I can maybe think of is that it might have been a bear before, but that wouldn't add up with the earlier descriptions of it sounding cat-like. I feel like a lot of Lovecraft's early work is very predictable. To be fair, this and literally the next one are, I believe he made them while he was in high school, so it's not that surprising. But still, it does lead into kind of that idea. Also, his very unique way of writing. Even I'm not this bad, and I still use choice words when I write. So yeah, well, I speak in write in a formal manner. Still, I'm trying to think. Oh man, they both end with the last lines being in all caps. I only just noticed that this and the next one, because the first two, like the Alchemist and the Beast in the Cave, are both. Like these first two, he took a break and didn't do anything for a while, and then went back into writing. The Alchemist is a little bit longer, I think. You know what? The Beast in the Cave was 7, and I didn't even realize that. It is a lot to try and read Lovecraft's way of writing. It's a bit awkward. Give me a second to get some water, and then I'll read something. We might actually do The Color from Out of Space instead. Maybe. That was 7, and that took about a half an hour. Let's see. How long would it about take for me to read The Pillar from Outer Space? Where is it even? Right. So let me do some quick math here. And we'll figure it out. Because it could be that the rest of the stream is me reading this, which would be perfectly fine. So let me check here. Minus... You know what? I'll read it. That'll be the rest of the stream. Right. It's pretty far in. So it'll take a little bit to get back there, but we should be able to. Here we go. Let me readjust, and then we'll talk about it afterwards as well. This one is also not a very racist one. Like, I was actually maybe expecting to read one of those, but if it's going to take that long, we can just avoid them for now. I feel like I should maybe read through his whole library at some point here. Like, just over a couple months or something. At least that's kind of the plan at this point, is maybe to, like, read these, like, every week or so. Just a couple of them. Maybe. I don't know, I haven't read a lot of them myself, so I should probably be doing that as well. And then I can read them, and like, because then I'll know where stuff that I shouldn't be reading is at, so I don't accidentally read it. Speaking of which, let's look up what consumptive means really fast. Where's my bookmark? Just so I can put it over here. Alright, how do you spell this? Let's see. This way? No, it's this way. Okay. Let's see. The Mortal Man thing. It's gotta be first 2 pages, I think. And then after. There was another one. I'll find it. Oh, there it is. Okay. CONSUMPTIVE. What does that mean? So apparently it means, somebody with a disease like tuberculosis. I really hope that isn't being used in a racist manner here, but I genuinely don't know. If it is, I'm sorry, because I did not know that. If not, okay. Let's just move on, though. This is about, Lovecraft's not like of hillbillies, but also weird things. Well, kind of. It talks about, like, insular communities, which, you know, they exist, I suppose. Let's read it. Let's also... Let me check that I have, let's start this at the beginning. Alright. West of Arkham, the hills rise wild, and there are valleys with deep woods that no axe has ever cut. There are dark, narrow glens... Oh, sorry, this is the color out of space. There are dark, narrow glens where the trees slope fantastically, and where the thin booklets trickle without ever having caught the glint of sun... brooklets trickle without having caught the glint of sunlight. On the gentler slopes there are farms, ancient and rocky, with squat, moss-covered cottages brooding eternally over New England's secrets in the lee of great ledges. But these are all vacant now. The wide chimneys crumbling and the shingles and the shingled slides bulging purely behind low Grambo roofs. I don't know. The old folk had gone away. The foreigners do not like to live there. French Canadians have trailed it, Italians have tried it, and the Poles have come and departed. It is not because of anything that can be seen or heard or handled, but because of something that is imagined. The place is not good for the imagination, and does not bring restful dreams at night. It must be this which keeps the foreigners away, for old Ammi Pierce has never told them for anything he recalls. Told them anything he recalls from the strange days. Ammi, whose head has been a little weird for years, is the only one who still remains. For whoever talks of the strange days, and he dares to, whoever talks of the strange days, he dares do this, because his house is so near the open fields and the traveled roads around Arkham. There was once a road over the hills and through the valleys that ran straight where the Blasted Heath is now, but people ceased to use it, and a new road was laid curving far towards the south. Traces of the old one can still be found amidst the weeds of a returning wilderness, and some of them will doubtless linger even when half of the hollows are flooded for the new reservoir. Then the dark woods will be cut down, and the Blasted Heath will slumber far below blue waters, whose surface will mirror the sky and ripple in the sun. And the secrets of the strange days will be one with the deep's secrets, one with the hidden lore of old ocean, and all the mystery of primal earth. When I went into the hills and valleys to survey for the new reservoir, they told me the place was evil. They told me this in Arkham, and because that is a very old town, full of witch legends, I thought the evil must be something which grandmas had whispered to children through centuries. The name Blasted Heath seemed to me very odd and theatrical, and I wondered how it had come into the folklore of Puritan people. Then I saw that dark, westward triangle of glens and slopes for myself, and ceased to wonder at anything besides its own elder mystery. It was morning when I saw it, but shadow lurked always there. The trees grew too thickly, and their trunks were too big for any healthy New England wood. There was too much silence in the dim alleys between them, and the floor was too soft with the dank moss and mattings of infinite years of decay. And the open spaces, mostly along the line of the old road, there were little hillside farms, sometimes with all the buildings standing, sometimes with only one or two, and sometimes with only a lone chimney or fast-falling cellar. Weeds and briars reigned, and furtive wild things rustled in the undergrowth. Upon everything was a haze of restlessness and oppression, a touch of the unreal and the grotesque, as if some vital element of perspective or something were awry. I did not wonder that the foreigners would not stay, for this was no region to sleep in. It was too much like a landscape of Salvatore Rosa, too much like some forbidden woodcut in a tale of terror. But even all that was not so bad as the Blasted Heath. I knew it the moment I came upon it at the bottom of a spacious valley, for no other name could fit such a place, or any other thing fit such a name. It was as if the poet had coined the phrase from having seen this one particular region. It must, I thought as I viewed it, be the outcome of a fire. But why had nothing new ever grown out of those 5 acres of gray desolation that sprawled open to the sky like a great spot eaten by acid in the woods and fields? It lay largely to the north of the ancient road line, but encroached a little on the other side. I felt an odd reluctance about approaching, and did so at last only because my business took me through and past it. There was no vegetation of any kind on that broad expanse, but only a fine grey dust or ash which no wind ever seemed to blow about. The trees near it were sickly and stunted, and many dead trunks stood or lay rotting at the rim. As I walked hurriedly by, I saw the tumbled bricks and stones of an old chimney and cellar on my right, and the yawning black maw of an abandoned well, whose stagnant vapors played strange tricks with the hues of the sunlight. Even that long, dark woodland climb beyond seemed welcome in contrast, and I marveled no more at the frightened whispers of the Arkham people. Here had been no house or ruin near. Even in the old days, the place must have been lonely and remote. And, at twilight, dreading to repass that ominous spot, I walked circuitously, I guess. Back to the town by the curved road on the south. I vaguely wished some clouds would gather, for an old timidity about the sky seemed about the deep, skyey voids had crept into my soul. Oh, I forgot how dumb that sounds. The sky is described as skyey. Alright, let's move on. In the evening, I asked old people in Arkham about the Blasted Heath, and what was meant by that phrase, strange days, which so many evasively muttered. I could not, however, get any good answers, except that all the mystery was much more recent than I had dreamed. It was not a matter of old legend at all, but something with the lifetime of those who spoke. It happened in the 1880s, and a family had appeared or was killed. Speakers would not be exact, and because they all had told me to pay no attention to old Ammi Pierce's crazy tales, I sought him out the next morning, having heard that he lived alone in the ancient tottering cottage, where the trees first began to get thick. Yeah, let me take a little drink of water really quick. That's better. Alright, let's get back to it. Yeah, our tottering cottage. Where's that? Here we go. It was a fearsomely archaic place, and had begun to exude the faint, miasmal odor which clings about houses that have stood too long. Only with persistent knocking could I rouse the aged man, and when he shuffled timidly to the door, I could tell that he was not glad to see me. He was not so feeble as I had expected, but his eyes drooped in a curious way, and his unkempt clothing and white beard made him seem very worn and dismal. Not knowing just how he could best be launched on his tales, I feigned a manner of business, told him of my surveying, and asked vague questions about the district. He was far brighter and more educated than I had been led to think, and before I knew it, had grasped quite as much of the subject as any man I had talked with in Arkham. He was not like other rustics I had known in the sections where reservoirs were to be. From him, there were no protests at the miles of old wood and farmland to be blotted out, though perhaps there would have been had not his home lain outside. Sorry, give me a second. Though perhaps there would not have been had not his home lain outside the bounds of the future lake. Relief was all that he shrewd. Relief at the doom of the dark ancient valleys through which he had roamed all his life. They were better underwater now, better underwater since the strange days, and with this opening his husky voice sank low, while his body leaned forward and his right forefinger began to point shakily and impressively. Let me move a little bit. It was then that I heard this story, and as the rambling voice scraped and whispered on I shivered again and again, despite the summer day. Often I had to recall the speaker from ramblings piece out scientific points which I knew only by fading parrot memory of professors' talks, or bridge over gaps where his sense of logic and continuity broke down. When he was done, I did not wonder what his mind had not wonder that his mind had snapped a trifle, or that the folk of Arkham would not speak much of the Blasted Heath. Hurried back before sunset to my hotel, unwilling to have the stars come out above me in the open, and the next day returned to Boston to give up my position. I could not go into that dim chaos of old forest and slope again, or face another time that gray blasted heath with a black well yawned deep beside the tumbling bricks and stones. The reservoir will soon be built now, and all those elder secrets will be safe forever under watery fathoms. But even then, I do not believe I would like to visit that country by night. At least, not when the sinister stars are out, and nothing could bribe me to drink the new city water of Arkham. It all began, old Ami said, with the meteorite. Before that time, there had been no wild legends at all since the witch trials, and even then, these western woods were not feared half so much as the small island in the Miskatonic, where the devil held court beside a curious stone altar older than the natives. These were not haunted woods, and their fantastic dust was not terrible till the strange days. I never really caught that the first time I read it. Never mind. Let's keep going. Since the strange days. Then there had come that white noontide cloud, that string of explosions in the air, and that pillar of smoke from the valley far in the wood. And by night, all Arkham had heard of the great rock that fell out of the sky and bedded itself in the ground beside the well at the Nahum Gardner. Wow, that is a really... Okay, Nahum Gardner place. That was the house which had stood where the Blasted Heath was to come. The trim, white Nahum Gardner house, amidst its fertile gardens and orchards. I'm going to say Nahum instead. Wait, how should I say this guy's name? Because I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. Well, whatever. Nahum had come to town to tell people about the stone, and had dropped in at Ami Pierce's on the way. Ami was 40 then, and all the strange things were fixed very strongly in his mind. He and his wife had gone with the 3 professors from Miskatonic University, who hastened out the next morning to see the weird visitor from unknown stellar space, and had wondered why Nahum had called it so large the day before. It had shrunk, Nahum said, as he pointed out the big brownish mound above the rippling earth and charred glass near the archaic well swept in its front yard. But the wise men answered that stones do not shrink. Its heat lingered persistently, and Nahum declared it had grown faintly in the night. The professors tried it with a geologist's hammer and found it was oddly soft. It was, in truth, so soft to be almost plastic, and they gorged rather than chipped a specimen to take back to the college for testing. They took it in an old pail borrowed from Nahum's kitchen, and even the smallest piece refused to grow cold. On the trip back, they stopped at Ami's to rest, and seemed thoughtful when Mr. Pierce remarked that the fragment was growing smaller and burning the bottom of the pail. Truly, it was not large, but perhaps they had taken less than they had thought. The day after that, all this was in June of 882, the professors had trooped out again in a great excitement. They passed Ami's and told him what strange things the specimen had done, and how it had faded wholly away when they put it in the glass beaker. The beaker had gone too, and the wise men talked of the strange stone's affinity for silicon. I never caught that before either. It had acted quite unbelievingly in that well-ordered laboratory, doing nothing at all and shewing no occluded gases when heated on charcoal, being wholly negative in the borax bed. I don't know. And soon providing itself an absolutely non-volatile sorry, give me a second. And soon proving itself non-volatile at any producible temperature, including that of the oxyhydrogen blowpipe. These terms are really dry and hard to read. I'm sorry. On an anvil it appeared highly malleable, and in the dark its luminosity was well marked. Stubbornly refusing to grow cold, it soon had the college in a state of real excitement, and when upon heating before the spectroscope, it displayed shining bands unlike any known colors of the normal spectrum. There was much breathless talk of new elements, bizarre optical properties, and other things which puzzled men of science want to say when faced with the unknown. Hot as it was, they tested it in a crucible with all the proper regiments. Water did nothing, hydrochloric acid was the same, nitric acid and even aqua merely hissed and spatted against its torrid invulnerability. Ami had difficulty in recalling all those things, but recognized some surveillance as I mentioned them in the usual order of use. There were ammonia, caustic soda, alcohol, and ether, nauseous carbon something, and a dozen others. But although the weight grew steadily less as time passed, the fragments seemed to be slightly cooling, and there was no change in the solvents to show that they had attacked the substance at all. It was a metal, though, beyond a doubt. It was magnetic for one thing, and after its immersion in acidic solvents, there seemed to be faint traces of something, figures found on meteoric iron. When the cooling had grown very considerable, the testing was carried on in glass, and it was a glass beaker that they left all the chips made from the original fragments during the work. The next morning, both chips and beaker were gone without a trace, and only a charred spot remained in the place of the wooden shelf where they had been. All this the professors told Ami as they pushed at his door, and once more he went with them to see the stony messenger from the stars, though this time his wife did not accompany him. It had now most certainly shrunk, and even the sober professors could not doubt the truth of what they saw. All around the dwindling brown lump near the well was a vacant space where the earth had caved in, and worst, it had been a good 7 feet across the day before. It was now scarcely 5, it was still hot, and the sages studied its surface curiously as they detached another and larger piece with a hammer and chisel. They gouged deeply this time, and they pried away the smaller mass. They gouged deeply this time, and as they pried away the smaller mass, they saw that the core of the thing was not quite homogeneous. They had uncovered what seemed to be the side of a large colored globule embedded in the substance. The color, which resembled some of the bands in the meteor's strange spectrum, was almost impossible to describe, and it was only by analogy that they called it a color at all. Its texture was glossy, and upon tapping it appeared to promise both brittleness and hollowness. One of the professors gave it a small blow with a hammer, and it burst with a nervous little pop. Nothing was emitted, and all trace of the thing vanished with the puncturing. It left behind us hollow spectral space of about 3 inches across, and all thought it probable that others would be discovered, as the conjecture was vain. So, after a futile attempt to find additional what's that? I completely forgot how to say it. Globules. By drilling, the seekers left again with their new specimen, which proved, however, as baffling in the laboratory as its predecessor had been. Aside from being almost plastic, having heat, magnetism, and slight luminosity, cooling slightly in powerful acids, possessing an unknown spectrum, wasting away in air, and attacking silicon compounds with a mutual destruction as a result, it presented no identifying features whatsoever, and at the end of the test, the college scientists were forced to own that they could not place it. It was nothing of this earth, but a piece of the great outside, and such dowered by the outside properties and obedient to outside laws. I'm having trouble reading this. Okay. Let me drink some water really quick to try and see if that helps. Just to also give myself a little break. Right. How long is this one? Jeez, quite a while. Alright. That night there was a thunderstorm, and when the professors went out to Nahum's the next day, they met with a bitter disappointment. The stone, magnetic as it had been, must have had some peculiar electric property, for it had drawn the lightning, as Nahum said, with a singular persistence. 6 times within an hour the farmer saw the lightning strike the farrow in the front of the yard, and when the storm was over, nothing remained but a ragged pit by the ancient well-swept, half-choked with well-sweep, half-choked with caved-in earth. Digging had borne no fruit, and the scientists verified the fact of utter vanishment. The failure was total, so that nothing was left to do but go back to the laboratory and test again the disappearing fragment left carefully cased in lead. That fragment lasted a week, at the end of which nothing of value had been learned of it. When it had gone, no residue was left behind, and in time the professors felt scarcely, I guess, sure they had indeed seen with waking eyes that cryptic vestige of the fathomless gulfs outside, that lone, weird message from other universes and other realms of matter, force, and entity. As was natural, the Arkham papers made much of the incident with its sponsoring, and sent reporters to talk with Nahum Gardner and his family. At least one Boston daily also sent a scribe, and Nahum quickly became a kind of local celebrity. He was a lean, genial person of about 50, living with his wife and 3 sons on the pleasant farmstead in the valley. He and Ami exchanged visits frequently, as did their wives, and Ami had nothing but praise for him after all these years. He seemed slightly proud of the notice his place had attracted, and talked often of the meteorite in the succeeding weeks. That July and August were hot, and Nahum worked hard at his haying in the 10-square pasture across Chapman's Brook. This rattling weighing where deep ruts in the shadowy lanes between, the labor tired him more than it had in other years, and he felt that age was beginning to tell on him. Then fell the time of fruit and harvest. The pears and apples slowly ripened, and Nahum vowed that his orchards were prospering as never before. The fruit was growing to phenomenal size and wanted gloss, and in such abundance that extra barrels were ordered to handle the future crop. But with the ripening came sore disappointment, for all that gorgeous array of spacious luxuriousness, not a single jolt was fit to eat. And to the fine flavor of pears and apples had crept a stealthy bitterness and sickishness, so that even the smallest of bites induced a lasting disgust. It was the same with the melons and tomatoes, and Nahum sadly saw that his entire crop was lost. Quick to connect events, he declared that the meteorite had poisoned the soil, and thanked heaven that most of the other crops were in the unplanted lot along the road, or in the upland lot across the road. Not unplanted. Winter came early and was very cold. Ami saw Nahum less than often than usual, and observed that he had begun to look worried. The rest of his family, too, seemed to have grown taciturn, and were far from steady in their church-going or their attendance at the various social events of the countryside. For his reserve or melancholy, no cause could be found, though all the household confessed now and then to poor health and a feeling of vague disquiet. Nahum himself gave the most definite statement of anyone who, when he said that he was disturbed about certain footprints in the snow. There were the usual winter prints of red squirrels, white rabbits, and foxes, but the brooding farmer professed to see something that was not quite right in their nature and arrangement. He was never specific, but appeared to think that they were not as characteristic of the anatomy and habits of squirrels and rabbits and foxes as they ought to be. Ami listened without interest to this talk until one night, when he drove past Nahum's house in his sleigh on the way back from Clark's Corners. There had been a moon, and a rabbit ran across the road, and the leaps of that rabbit were longer than either Ami or his horse liked. The latter, indeed, had almost run away when brought up by firm rein. Thereafter Ami gave Nahum's tales more respect, and wondered why the Gardner dogs seemed so cowardly and quivering every morning. They had, it developed, nearly lost the spirit to bark. In February, the McGregor boys from Meadow Hill were out shooting woodchucks, and not far from the Gardner place bagged a peculiar specimen. The proportions of its body seemed slightly altered in a strange way impossible to describe. While its face had taken on the expression which no one had ever seen in a woodchuck before, the boys were genuinely frightened, and threw the thing away at once, so that only their grotesque tales of it ever reached the people of the countryside. But the shying away of the horses near Nahum's house had now become an acknowledged thing, and all of the basis of a cycle of whispering legend was fast taking form. All the bases of a cycle of whispering legend was fast taking form. People vowed that the snow melted faster around Nahum's than it did anywhere else. And early in March, there was an odd discussion in Potter's general store at Clark's Corners. Stephen Rice had driven past Gardner's in the morning and noticed the skunk cabbages coming up through the mud of the woods across the road. Never were things of such size seen before, and they had strange colors that could not be put into any words. I hate that so much. Their shapes were monstrous, and the horse had snorted at the odor which stunk Stephen as wholly unprecedented. That afternoon, several persons drove past to see the abnormal growth, and all agreed that plants of that kind ought never to sprout in a healthy world. The bad fruit of the fall before was freely mentioned, and it went from mouth to mouth that there was poison in Nahum's ground. Of course, it was the meteorite, and remembering how strange the men from the college had found that stone to be, several farmers spoke of the matter to them. One day they paid Nahum a visit, but having no love for wild tales and folklore, were very conservative in what they inferred. The plants were certainly odd, but all skunk cabbages are more or less in shape and odor and hue. Perhaps some mineral element from the stone had entered the soil, but it would soon be washed away. And as for footprints and frightened horses, of course, this was mere country talk, with such a phenomenon as the, I don't know, would be certain to start. It's like not even an English word. The E has umlaut on it. Yeah. An umlaut is the two dots above a vowel. We'll skip it. Would be certain to start. There was really nothing for serious men to do in cases of wild gossip, for superstitious rustics will say and believe anything. And so all through the strange days the professor stayed away in contempt. Only one of them, when given 2 files of dust for analysis and a police job over a year and a half later, recalled that the queer color of the skunk cabbage had been very like one of the ominous bands of light shown through the meteor fragment in the college spectroscope, and like the brittle globule found embedded in the stone from the abyss. The samples in this analysis case gave the same odd bands at first, though later they lost the property. The trees budded prematurely around Nahum's, and the night sky swayed ominously in the wind. Nahum's second son, Thaddeus, a lad of 15, swore that they swayed also when there was no wind, but even the gossips would not credit this. Certainly, however, restlessness was in the air. The entire Gardner family developed a habit of stealthy listening, though not for any sound which they could consciously name. The listening was indeed rather a product of moments when consciousness seemed half to slip away. Unfortunately, such moments increased week by week, till it became a common speech that something was wrong with all of Nahum's folks. When the early saxifrag came out, it had another strange color, but not quite like that of the skunk cabbage, but plainly related and equally unknown to anyone who saw it. Nahum took some blossoms to Arkham and showed them to the editor at the Gazette, but that dignitary did more than write a humorous article about them in which that dignitary did no more than write a humorous article about them, in which the dark fears of rustics were held to polite ridicule. It was a mistake of Nahum's to tell stolid city man about the ways of great overgrown morning cloak butterflies, bathing in connection with these sarcophages. Anyway, I feel like I'm not reading any of this correctly, and that's mostly because Lovecraft is hard to read. Let me just check. How long do we have with this one? A little bit less than... Actually, a little bit more than 10. Looks like it's 16. Cool. Oh, I've heard this music before. Yeah. Not in a while, but I've heard it before. Anyway. April brought a kind of madness to the country folk. It's actually almost perfect, because what I know it for is a thing called Creeper World, which is kind of like a bit of a tower defense game, but it's also got some horror elements in it a little bit. I don't know. Anyway. April brought a kind of madness to the country folk, and began that disuse of the road past Nahum's, which led to its ultimate abandonment. It was the vegetation. All the orchard trees blossomed forth in strange colors, and though the stony soil of the yard and adjacent pasture, there sprang up a bizarre growth which only botanists could connect with the proper flora of the region. No sane, wholesome colors were anywhere to be seen except in the green grass and leafage, but everywhere those hectic and prismatic variants of some disease underlying primary tone, without a place among the known taints of earth. The Dutchman's breeches became a thing of sinister menace, and the blood roots grew insolent in their chromatic perversion. I don't know any of these plants, by the way. Ami and the gardeners thought that most of the colors had a sort of haunting familiarity, and decided that they reminded one of the brittle globule in the meteor. Nahum plowed and sowed the 10-acre pasture and the upland lot, but did nothing with the land around the house. He knew it would be of no use, and hoped that the summer's strange growths would draw all the poison from the soil. He was prepared for almost anything now, and had grown used to the sense of something near him waiting to be heard. The shunting of his house by neighbors told on him, of course, but it was told on his wife more. The boys were better off being at school each day, but they could not help being frightened by the gossip. Thaddeus, an especially sensitive youth, suffered the most. Yeah. Let me take a little drink. I can feel my throat getting dry. I feel like it did that last page. Okay. In May, the insects came, and Nahum's place became a nightmare of buzzing and crawling. Most of the creatures seemed not quite usual in their aspects and motions, and their nocturnal habits contradicting all former experience. The gardeners took to watching at night, watching in all directions at random for something. They could not tell what. It was then that they all owned that Thaddeus had been right about the trees. Miss Gardner was the next to see it. From the window she watched as the swollen brose of the maple against a moonlit sky. The brose surely moved, and there was no wind. It must be the sap. Strangeness had come into everything growing now. Yet it was none of Nahum's family at all who had made the next discovery. Familiarity had dulled them, and what they could not see was glimpsed by a timid windmill salesman from Boston, who drove by one night in ignorance of the country legends. What he was told in Arkham was given a short paragraph in the Gazette, and it was there that all the farmers, Nahum included, saw it first. The night had been dark, and the buggy lamps faint, but around the farm in the valley, which everyone knew from the account must be Nahum's, the darkness had been less thick. A dim and distinct luminosity seemed to adhere in all the vegetation, grass, leaves, and blossoms alike, while at one moment a detached piece of phosphorescence appeared to stir furtively in the yard near the barn. I don't really know. The grass had so far seemed untouched, and the cows were freely pastured in the lot near the house. But toward the end of May, the milk began to be bad. Then Nahum had the cows driven to the uplands, after which the trouble ceased. Not long after the change in grass and leaves became apparent to the eyes, all the verdure was going gray, and was developing a highly singular quality of brittleness. Ami was now the only person who ever visited the place, and his visits were becoming fewer and fewer. When school closed, the Gardners were virtually cut off from the world, and sometimes let Ami do their errands in town. They were failing curiously, both physically and mentally, and no one was surprised when news of Miss Gardner's madness stole around. It happened in June, about the anniversary of the meteor's fall, and the poor woman screamed about things in the air which she could not describe. In her ravings there was not a single specific noun, but only verbs and pronouns. Things moved and changed and fluttered, and ears tingled to impulses which were not wholly sounds. Something was taken away. She was being drained of something. Something was fastening itself on her that ought not to be. Someone must make it keep off. Nothing was ever still in the night. The walls and windows shifted. Nahum did not send her to the county asylum, but let her wander around the house as long as she was harmless to herself and others. Even when her expressions changed, he did nothing. But when the boys grew afraid of her, and Thaddeus nearly fainted at the way she made faces at him, he decided to keep her locked in the attic. By July, she had ceased to speak and crawled on all fours, and before that month was over, Nahum got the mad notion that she was slightly luminous in the dark, as he now clearly saw was the case with the nearby vegetation. It was a little before this that the horses had stampeded. Something had aroused them in the night, and their neighing and kicking in the stalls had been terrible. There seemed virtually nothing to do to calm them, and when Nahum opened the stable door, they all bolted out like frightened woodland deer. It took a week to track all four, and when found, they were seen to be quite useless and unmanageable. Something had snapped in their brains, and each one had to be shot for its own good. Nahum borrowed a horse from Ami for his haying, but found it would not approach the barn. It shed, balked, and whined, and in the end he could do nothing but drive it into the yard while the men used their own strength to get the heavy wagon near enough to the hayloft for convenient pitching. And all the while the vegetation was turning gray and brittle. Even the flowers whose hue had been so strange were graying now, and the fruit was coming out gray and dwarfed and tasteless. The asters and goldenrod bloomed gray and distorted, and the roses and zinnias and hollyhocks of the front yard were such blasphemous-looking things that Nahum's oldest son, Zenas, cut them down. The strangely puffed insects died about that time. Even the bees that had left their hives and taken to the woods. By September, all the vegetation was fast crumbling to a grayish powder. All the vegetation was fast crumbling to a grayish powder, and Nahum feared that the trees would die before the poison was out of the soil. His wife now had spells of terrific screaming, and he and the boys were in a constant state of nervous tension. They shunted people now, and when school opened the boys did not go. But it was Ami, on one of his rare visits, who first realized that the well water was no good. It had an evil taste that was not exactly fortid, nor exactly salty, and Ami advised his friend to dig another well on higher ground to use till the soil was good again. I feel like that should be more obvious, but sure. Nahum, however, ignored the warning, for he had by that time become calloused to the strange and unpleasant things. He and the boys continued to use the tainted supply, drinking it as listlessly and mechanically as they ate their meager and ill-cooked meals and did their thankless and monotonous chores through the aimless days. There was something of stolid resignation about them all, as if they walked half in another world between the lines of nameless guards to a certain and familiar doom. Thaddeus went mad in September after the visit to the well. He had gone with a pail and come back empty-handed, streaking, waving his arms, and sometimes lapsing into an insane titter or whispering about the moving colors down there. 2 in one family was pretty bad, but Nahum was very brave about it. He let the boy run about for a week until he began stumbling and hurting himself. Then he shut him in an attic room across the hall from his mother's. The way they screamed at each other from behind their locked doors was very terrible, especially to the little Merwin, who fancied they talked in some terrible language that it was not of earth. Merwin was getting frightfully imaginative, and his restlessness was worse than after shutting away the brother who had been his greatest playmate. Let me move a little bit. Almost at the same time, the mortality amongst the livestock commenced. Poultry turned grayish and died very quickly, their meat being found dry and noisome upon cutting. Hogs grew inordinately fat, then suddenly began to undergo loathsome changes which no one could explain. Their meat was, of course, useless, and Nahum was at his wit's end. No rural veterinary would approach his place, and the city veterinary from Arkham was openly baffled. The swine began growing gray and brittle and falling to pieces before they died, and their eyes and muzzles developed singular alterations. It was very inexplicable, for they had never been fed from the tainted vegetation. Then something struck the cows. Certain areas, or sometimes the whole body, would be uncannily shriveled or compressed, and atrocious collapses or disintegrations were common. And the last stages, and death was always the result, there would be a grain and turning brittle, like that which beset the hogs. There could be no question of poison, for all the cases occurred in a locked and undisturbed barn. No bites of prowling things could have brought the virus. For what live beast of earth could pass through solid obstacles? It must be only natural disease. Yet what disease could wreak such results was beyond any mind's guessing. When the harvest came, there was not an animal surviving on the place, for the stock and poultry were dead and the dogs had run away. These dogs, 3 in number, had all vanished one night and were never heard of again. The 5 cats had left some time before, but their going was scarcely noticed, since there now seemed to be no mice, and only Miss Gardner had made pets of the graceful felines. On the 19th of October, Nahum staggered into Ami's house with horrendous news. The death had come to poor Thaddeus in his attic room, and it had come in a way which could not be told. Nahum had dug a grave in the railed family plot behind the farm, and had put therein what he found. There could have been nothing from outside, for the small barred window and locked door were intact, but it was much as if it had been in the barn. Ami and his wife consoled the stricken man as best they could, but shuddered as they did so. Stark terror seemed to cling around the Gardners and all they touched, and the very presence of one in the house was breath from regions unnamed and unnameable. Geez, some of the wording in this. I swear I don't have this much problems reading other stuff. It's really just Lovecraft. Ami accompanied Nahum home with the greatest reluctance, and did what he might to calm the hysteric sobbing of little Merwin. Zenas needed no calming. He had come of late to do nothing but stare into space and obey what his father told him, and Ami thought that his fate was very merciful. Now and then, Merwin's screams were answered faintly from the attic, and in response to an inquiring look, Nahum said that his wife was getting very feeble. When the night approached, Ami managed to get away, for not even friendship could make him stay in that spot when the faint glow of the vegetation begun, and the trees may or may not have been swaying without wind. It was really lucky for Ami that he had not been more imaginative. Even as things were, his mind was bent ever so slightly, but had he been able to connect and reflect upon all the portents around him, he must inevitably have turned to a total manic. In the twilight he hastened home, the screams of the mad woman and the nervous child ringing horribly in his ears. 3 days later, Nahum lurched into Ami's kitchen in the early morning, and, in the absence of his host, stammered out a desperate tale once more. While Miss Pierce listened in clutching fright, it was little Merwin this time. He was gone. He had gone out late at night with a lantern and a pail of water, and had never come back. He'd been going to pieces for days and hardly knew what he was about, screaming at everything. There had been a frantic shriek from the yard then, but before the father could get to the door, the boy was gone. There was no glow from the lantern he had taken, and of the child himself no trace. At the time, Nahum thought the lantern and pail were gone too, but when dawn came, the man had plodded back from his all-night search of the woods and fields and had found some very curious things near the well. There was a crushed an apparently somewhat melted mess of iron, which had certainly been the lantern, while a bent bale a bent bale and twisted iron hoops beside it, both half fused, seemed to hint the remains of the pail that seemed to be the remains of the pail. Jeez, that was all. Nahum was past imagining Miss Pierce. Miss Pierce was blank, and Ami, when he had reached the home and heard the tale, could give no guess. Merwin was gone, and there would be no use in telling people around who shunted all Gardners now. No use either in telling the city people at Arkham who laughed at everything. Thad was gone, and now Murney was gone. Something was creeping and waiting to see and felt and heard. Nahum would go soon, and he wanted Ami to look after his wife and Zenas if they survived him. It must all be a judgment of some sort, though he could not fancy what for, since he had always walked uprightly in the Lord's ways so far as he knew. Give me a second to take a drink. There's still 10 pages left. Okay. Fuck, this is a lot to read. For over 2 weeks, Ami saw nothing of Nahum. Then, worried about what might have happened, he overcame his fears and paid the Gardner place a visit. There was no smoke from the great chimney, and for a moment the visitor was apprehensive of the worst. The aspect of the whole farm was shocking. Grayish, withered grass and leaves on the ground, vines falling in brittle wreckage from archaic walls and gabbings, and great bare trees clawing up the great grey November sky with a studied malevolence which Ami could not but feel had come from some subtle change in the tilt of the branches. But Nahum was alive. After all, he was alive after all. He was weak and lying on a couch in the low-ceiled kitchen, but perfectly conscious and able to give simple orders to Zenas. The room was deathly cold, and as Ami visibly shivered, the host shouted huskily to Zenas for more wood. Wood, indeed, was sorely needed, since the cavernous fireplace was unlit and empty, with a cloud of soot blowing about the chimney wind that came down from the chill wind that came down the chimney. Presently, Nahum asked if the extra wood had made him any more comfortable, and then Ami saw what had happened. The stoutest cord had been broken at last, and the hapless father's mind was proof against more sorrow. Questioning tactfully, Ami could get no clear data at all about the missing Zenas. "In the well. He lives in the well," was all the clouded father could say. Then there flashed across the visitor's mind a sudden thought of the mad wife, and he changed his line of inquiry. "Nabby, why, here she is. Nabby, why, here she is," was the surprised response of poor Nahum, and Ami soon saw that he must search for himself, leaving the harmless blabber on the couch. He took the keys from the nail beside the door and climbed the creaking stairs to the attic. It was very close and noisome up there. And no sound could be heard from any direction, for the 4 doors in sight, only one was locked, and on this he tried various keys on the ring he had taken. The 3rd key proved to be the right one, and after some fumbling, Ami threw open the low white door. Let me move a little bit. Right. It was quite dark inside, for the window was small and half obscured by the crude wooden bars, and Ami could see nothing at all on the wide planked floor. The stench was beyond enduring, and before proceeding further, he had to retreat to another room and return with his lungs filled with breathable air. When he did enter, he saw something dark in the corner, and upon seeing it more clearly, he screamed outright. While he screamed, he thought a sorry. When he screamed, he thought a momentary cloud eclipsed the window, and a second later he felt himself brushed as if by some hateful current of vapor. Strange colors danced before his eyes, and had not present horror numbed him, he would have thought of the globule in the meteor that the geologist's hammer had smashed. Or not smashed, had shattered, and the morbid vegetation that had sprouted in the spring. As it was, he thought only the blasphemous monstrosity that confronted him, and which all too clearly had shared the nameless fate of the young Thaddeus and the livestock. But the terrible thing about this horror was that it very slowly and very perceptibly moved as it continued to crumble. Yeah. Ami would give me no added particulars to this scene, but the shape in which the corner does not reappear in this tale as a moving object. Oh, sorry. Ami would not give me any. Sorry, just give me a second to fix something really quick. There we go, now I can hold on this properly. Okay. Ami would give me no added particulars to this scene, but the shape in the corner does not reappear in this tale as a moving object. There are things which cannot be mentioned, and what is done in common humanity is sometimes cruelly judged by the law. I gathered that no moving thing was left in that attic room, and that to leave anything capable of motion there would have been a deed so monstrous as to damn any accountable being to eternal torment. Anyone but a stolid farmer would have fainted or gone mad, but Ami walked consciously through the low doorway and locked the accursed secret behind him. There would be Nahum to deal with now. He must be fed and tended and removed to some place where he could be cared for. You can tell Lovecraft was never in the war because he thinks a farmer is the only kind of person who would be able to handle that thing. Oh, after the shit people saw in World War I highly doubt that. Anyway, let me take a drink of water and we'll get back into it. My mouth just keeps drying out. Give me 1 second, actually. I want to do something. I think that's better. I don't know. Let's just keep reading. Let's see. Commencing his descent of the dark stairs, Ami heard a thud below him. He even thought a scream had been suddenly choked off, and recalled nervously the clammy vapor which had brushed by him in that frightful room above. What presence had his cry and entry started up? Halted by some vague fear, he heard still further sounds below. Indubitably, there was a sort of heavy dragging, and a most detestable sticky noise of some fiendish and unclean species of suction, I guess, with an associative sense of goading to with an associative sense of goading to feverish heights. He thought unaccountably of what he had seen upstairs. Good God, what eldritch dream world was this into which he had blundered? He dared move neither backward nor forward, but stood there trembling at the back curve of the boxed-in staircase. Every trifle in the scene burned itself into his brain. The sounds, the sense of dread, expectancy, the darkness, the steepness, the steepness of the narrow steps, and merciful heaven, the faint and unmistakable luminosity of all the woodwork in sight, steps, sides, exposed laths, and beams alike. There burst forth a frantic whinny from Amy's horse outside, followed at once by a clatter which told of a frenzied runaway. In another moment, frenzied runaway. In another moment, horse and buggy had gone beyond earshot, leaving the frightened man on the dark stairs to guess what had sent them. But that was not all. There had been another sound out there, a sort of liquid splash, water. It must have been the well. He had left. That's the name of this. He had left Hero untied near it, and the buggy well must have brushed the coping and knocked in a stone. And still, the pale phosphorescence glowed in the deepest and that detestably ancient woodwork. God, how old the house was! Most of it built before 1670, and the gambrel roof not later than 1730. Geez, I am having trouble with this. A feeble scratching on the floor downstairs now sounded distinctly, and Ami's grip tightened on a heavy stick he had picked up from the attic for some purpose. Slowly nerving himself, he finished his descent and walked broadly towards the kitchen. He did not complete the walk, because what he sought was no longer there. It had come to meet him, and it was still alive after a fashion. Whether it had crawled or whether it had been dragged by an external force, Ami could not say, but the death had been at it. Everything had happened in the last hour, everything that happened in the last hour, but collapse, grain, and disintegration were already far advanced. There was a horrible brittleness, and dry fragments were scaling off. Ami could not touch it, but looked horrified into the disordered parody that had been a face. What was it, Nahum? What was it? He whispered, and the bulging lips were just able to crackle out a final answer. Nothing. The color. It burns. Cold and wet. Cold and wet, but it burns. It lived in the well. I seen it. A kind of smoke. Just like the flowers last spring. The well shone at night. Tad and Murney and Xanus, everything alive, sucking the life out of everything. And that stone, it must have come in that stone. Present the whole place. Don't know what it wants. That round thing the men from the college dug out of the stone. They smashed it. It was the same color. Just the same color like the flowers and plants. Must have been more of them. Seeds. They growed. I seen it the first time this week. Must have got strong as Xanus. He was a big boy, full of life. It beats down your mind and it gets you, burns you up. In the well water. He was right about that. Evil water. Xanus never come back from the well. Can't get way. Draws you. You know something's coming. But 'tain't no use. I seen it time and again since Xanus was took. What is Nabby? Ami? My head was no good. My head's no good. Don't know how long since I fed her. I'll get her if we ain't careful. Just a color. Her face getting too heavy. That color sometimes towards night. And it burns and sucks. It come from the same place where things ain't as they are here. One of them professors said so. He was right. Get out, Ami. It'll do something more. Sucks the life out of you. Oh, fuck, that voice is hard to do. Okay. But that was all that which spoke. But that was all. That which spoke could speak no more because it had completely caved in. Ami laid a red-cheeked tablecloth over what was left and reeled out the back door into the fields. He climbed the slope to the 10-acre pasture and stumbled home by the north road and the woods. He could not pass that well from which his horse had run away. He had looked at it through the window and had seen that no stone was missing from the rim. Then the lurching buggy had not dislodged anything at all. The splash was something else, something which went into the well after it had done with poor Nahum. When Ami reached his house, the horse and buggy had arrived before him, and thrown his wife into fits of anxiety. Reassuring her without explanations, he set out at once for Arkham, and notified the authorities that the Gardner family was no more. He indulged no details, but merely told of the deaths of Nahum and Nabby, and that of Thabius already being known, and mentioned that the cause seemed to be some strange ailment which had killed the livestock. He also stated that Merwin and Zenas had disappeared. There was considerable questioning at the police station, and in the end, Ami was compelled to take the three officers to the Gardner farm, together with the coroner and the medical examiner, the coroner, the medical examiner, and the veterinary who had treated the diseased animals. He went much against his will, for the afternoon was advancing, and he feared the fall of night over that accursed place. But it was some comfort to have so many people with him. The 6 men drove out on a Democrat wagon? Alright. The 6 men drove out in a Democrat wagon. Actually, that might be a brand, and I just don't know. I don't know much about wagons. Following Ami's buggy, and arrived at the pest-ridden farmhouse. At the pest-ridden farmhouse about 4 o'clock. Used as the officers were to gruesome experiences, not one remained unmoved at what was found in the attic and under the red cloth cloth on the floor below. Okay, so that's... Okay, it isn't just farmers, but still. I'm guessing he meant, like, normal people then, but could have worded it better. Whatever. Talking about an older thing anyway. Right. Used as the officers were to gruesome experiences, not one remained unmoved at what was found in the attic and under the checked tablecloth on the floor below. The whole aspect of the farm with its gray desolation was terrible enough, but those 2 crumbling objects were beyond all bounds. No one could look long at them, and even the medical examiner admitted that there was very little to examine. Specimens could be analyzed, of course, so he busied himself in obtaining them, and here it develops that a very puzzling aftermath occurred at the college laboratory where the 2 piles of dust were finally taken. Under the spectroscopic, both samples gave off an unknown spectrum, in which many of the baffling bands were precisely like those which the strange meteor had yielded in the previous year. The property of emitting the spectrum vanished in a month. The dust thereafter consisted mainly of alkaline phosphates and carbonates. Worth noting, if I remember correctly, those do not actually show you a color, but they cut off a color, don't they? Like, I don't... Well, then again, like, yeah, it's just because... Like, for one, it's impossible to create a new color with something like that, so it wouldn't happen, but also, that kind of thing cuts off colors. It doesn't show it, at least from what I understand. I could be wrong. But I feel like, well, I mean, I know Lovecraft doesn't understand this. He probably just heard, oh, hey, there's colors that we can't see, and then thought, oh, hey, that means there's colors that we don't know exist or something, and then decided to write this off of it. It's pseudoscience-y, but it's... I mean, I like old sci-fi because it's stupid and funny and fun. I also like new sci-fi, though, so... I just like sci-fi in general, but it's fun seeing the way it progressed. Anyway, Ami would have not told the men about the well if he had thought they meant to do anything then and there. It was getting towards sunset, and he was anxious to be away, but he could not help glance nervously at the stony curb by the great sweep, and when a detective questioned him, he admitted that Nahum had feared something down there so much that he had never even thought of searching it for Merwin or Zenas. Um, or he had feared something down there so much that he had never even thought of searching for Merwin or Zenas. That was all together. That wasn't a switch. I didn't realize that. I thought there was a pause between because there's a dash between it. Whatever. After that, nothing would do but that they empty and explore the well immediately. So he had to wait trembling while pail after pail of rank water was hauled up and splashed on the soaking ground outside. The men sniffed in disgust at the fluid, and toward the last held their noses against the forture they were uncovering. It was not so long a job as they had feared it would be, since the water was phenomenally low. There was no need to speak to exactly what they found. Merwin and Zenas were both there, in part, though their vestiges were skeletal, or were mainly skeletal. There were also a small deer, a large dog in about the same state, and a number of bones of smaller animals. The ooze and slime at the bottom seemed inescapably porous, I guess, and bubbling. And a man who descended on handholds with a long pole found that he could sink the wooden shaft to any depth in the mud of the floor without meeting any solid obstruction. Twilight had now fallen, and lanterns were brought from the house. Then, when it was seen that nothing further could be gained from the well, everyone went indoors and conferred in the ancient sitting room while the intermittent light of a spectral half-moon played waningly on the gray, desolate outside. The men were frankly nonplussed, but were frankly nonplussed by the entire case, and could find no convincing common elements to link the strange vegetable conditions, the unknown disease of livestock and humans, and the unaccountable deaths of Merwin and Zenas in the tainted well. They had heard the common country talk, it is true, but could not believe that anything contrary to natural law had occurred. No doubt the meteor had poisoned the soil, but the illness of persons and animals who had eaten nothing growing in the soil was another matter. It was the well water. Was it the well water? Very possibly. It might have been a good idea to analyze it, but what particular madness could have made both the boys jump into the well? Their deeds were so similar, and the fragments showed that they had both suffered from the gray, brittle death. Why was everything so gray and brittle? It was the coroner, seated near a window outlooking the yard, who first noticed the glow about the well. Night had fully set in, and all the abhorrent ground seemed faintly luminous with more than the fitful moonbeams, but this new glow was something definite and distinct. It appeared to shoot up from the black pit like a softened ray from a searchlight, giving dull reflections in the little round pools where the water had been emptied. It was a very strange color, and as all the men clustered around the windows, Ami gave a violent start, for this strange beam of ghastly miasma was to him of no unfamiliar hue. He had seen that color before, and feared to think what it might mean. He had seen it in the nasty brittle globule in that meteorite 2 summers ago, I suppose. Again, I can't read that. Had seen it in the crazy vegetation of the springtime, and had thought he had seen it for an instant in that very morning against the small barred window of that terrible attic room where nameless things had happened. He had flashed there A second, and a clammy and hateful current of vapor had brushed past him, and then poor Nahum had been taken by something of that color. He had said so in his last. Said it was like the globule in the plants. After that had come the runway and the yard and the splash in the well, and now the well was belching forth to the night a pale, insidious beam of the same demonic taint. God, it's still so much to read. Okay. It does credit to the alertness of Ami's mind that he puzzled even that at that tense moment over a point which was essentially scientific. He could not but wonder at his gleaning of the same impression of a vapor glimpsed in the daytime, against a window opening in the morning sky, and from a nocturnal exultation seen as a phosphorescent mist against the black and blazed landscape. It was right. It wasn't right. It was against nature. And he thought of those terrible last words of his sickened friend. It came from some place where things ain't as they are here. One of them professors say so. All three horses outside, tied to a pair of shriveled saplings by the road, were now neighing and pawing frantically. The wagon driver started for the door to do something, but Ami laid a shaking hand on his shoulder. Don't go out there, he whispered. There's more to this than what we know. Nahum said something. Lived in a well that sucks your life out, he said. Sucks your life out. He said it must be some growed from around Ball, like one we all seen in the meteor stone that fell a year ago, June. Sucks and burns, he said, and is just a cloud of color like light out there now. That you can hardly see and can't tell what it is. Nathan thought it feeds on everything and everything lit and gets stronger at time, all the time. He said he's seen it this last week. It must be something from way off in the sky, like the men from college last year says. The meteor was. Jeez. I'm sorry this is going so terribly now. The way it's made and the way it works ain't like no way of God's world, and it's some from beyond. We just need to get through this. Okay, we're almost done. So the men paused decisively as the light from the well grew stronger, and hitched horses pawed and whined in the increasing frenzy. It was truly an awful moment, with terror in the ancient and accursed house itself, four monstrous sets of fragments, 2 from the house and 2 from the well, and the woodshed behind, and the shaft unknown and unholy iridescence from the slimy depths of in front. Anime had to strain the driver on impulse, forgetting how uninjured he himself was after the clammy bashing off that colored vapor in the attic room. But whatever. But perhaps it is just as well that he acted as he did. No one will ever know what that was abhorred that night, and though the blasphemy from beyond was not so far hurt, had not so far hurt any man of unweakened mind, there's no telling what it might have done at that last moment, with its seemingly increased strength and the special signs of purpose it was soon to display beneath the half-clouded moonlit sky. All at once, one of the detectives at the window gave a short, sharp sharp gasp. The others looked at him and then quickly followed his own gaze upward to the point at which its idle swaying had suddenly rested. There was no need for his words. What had been disputed and country gossip what had been disputed in country gossip was disputable no longer, and it is because the thing which every man it is because of that thing which every man of that party agreed in whispering later on the strange days are never talked about in Arkham. It is necessary to premise that there was no wind that hour of the evening. One did arise not long after, but there was absolutely none then. Even the dry taps of lingering hedge mustard, gray and blighted in the fridge of the room of the standing Democrat wagon were unstirred. And yet, amid the tense, godless calm, the high, bare brows of the trees of the yard were moving. They were twitching morbidly and spasmodically, clawing in convulsive and epileptic madness at the moonlit clouds, scratching impotently at the noxious air as if jerked by some alien and bodiless line of linkage with subterranean horrors writhing and struggling from the black roots. Yep, subterranean. Oh, fuck, I just want to get this done. My voice is breaking and everything. Not a man breathed for several seconds. Then a cloud of darker depth passed over the moon, and the silhouette of clutching branches faded out momentarily. At this, there was a general cry. At this, there was a general cry, muffled with awe, but husky and almost identical from every throat. Jeez. For the terror had not faded with the silhouette, and in a fearsome instant deeper darkness, the watcher saw wiggling at the treetop high 1,000 points of faint and unhallowed radiance, tipping each brow like fire of St. Elmo's, or the flames that came down on the apostles' heads. Heads at Pencos. I don't know. It was a monstrous constellation of unnatural light, like a glutted swarm of corpse-fed fireflies, dancing hellish sarbands over an accursed marsh. And its color was the same nameless intrusion which Ami had come to recognize and dread. All the while, the shaft of phosphorescence from the well was getting brighter and brighter, bringing to the minds of the hurtled men a sense of doom and abnormality which far outtraced any image their conscious minds could form. It was no longer shining out, it was pouring out, and the shapeless stream of unplaceable colors left the well pouring out, and the shapeless stream of unplaceable color left the well. Left the well, it seemed to flow directly into the sky. That does not seem like proper grammar. There's not even like a comma or something. Whatever. The veterinary shivered and walked to the front door to drop the heavy extra bar across it. Ami shook no less and had to tug it and point for lack of a controllable voice when he wished to draw notice to the growing luminosity of the trees. The neighing, stampeding of the horses had become utterly frightful, but not a soul of that group in the house would have ventured forth for any earthly reward. With the moments, the shining trees increased, while the restless branches seemed to strain more and more towards verticality. The woods of the well sweep were shining. Jesus Christ, the way that this is formatted. Well, sweep was shining now, and presently a policeman dumbly pointed. Pointed to some wooden sheds and beehives near the stone wall in west. They were commencing to shine too, though the tethered vehicles of the visitors seemed so far unaffected. Then there was a wild commotion and clopping in the road, and as Ami quenched the lamp for better seeing, they realized that the span of frantic grays had broken their sapling and run off with the Democrat wagon. Oh, that's the kind of horse. Okay. Okay, this is going to take forever. The shock served to loosen several tongues, and embarrassed whispers were exchanged. It spreads on everything organic that's been around here, muttered the medical examiner. No one replied, but the man who had been in the well gave a hint that his long pole must have stirred up something intangible. It was awful, he added. There was no bottom at all, just ooze and bubbles and feeling of something lurking under there. Ami's horse still pawed and screamed defiantly in the house, or in the road outside, and nearly drowned its owner's faint quaver as he muttered his formless reflections. It come from that. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not going to read that. Because it's just replacing. It's just redoing what the other guy said before. What Naheem said before. At this point, as the column of unknown color flared suddenly stronger and began to weave itself into frantic suggestions of shape, with each spectacular later describing differently, there came from poor tethered hero such a sound as no man before or since has ever heard from a horse. Every person in that low-pitched sitting room stopped his ears, and Ami turned away from the window in horror nausea. Words could not convey it. When Ami looked out again, the hapless beast lay huddled inert on the moonlight ground between the splintered shafts of the buggy. That was the last of Hero till they buried him the next day. But the present was no time to mourn, for almost at this very instant a detective silently called attention to something terrible in the very room with them. In the absence of the lamplight, it was clear that the faint phosphorescence had begun to pervade the entire apartment. It glowed on the board plank floor. Where was I? It glowed on the board planked floor and the fragment of rag carpet, and shimmered over the sashes of the small paned windows. It ran up and down the exposed corridor posts constructed about the shelf and mantel, and infected the very doors and furniture. Every minute saw it strengthening, and at last it was very plain that healthy living things must leave that house. Ami showed them the back door and the path up through the fields to the 10-acre pasture. They walked and stumbled as in a dream, and did not dare look back till they were far away from far on the high ground. They were glad of the path, and they could not have gone the front way, but that well. Sorry, then I'm not. God, I'm so tired. I'm sorry. I'm so tired. Fuck. Not like physically tired, but like my brain is melting down right now. They were glad of the path, for they could not have gone the front way by that well. It was bad enough passing the glowing barn and sheds, and those shining orchard trees with the gnarled, fiendish contours. But thank heaven the branches did their worst, twisting high up. The moon went under some very black clouds, and they crossed the rustic bridge over Champion's Brook, and it was blind groping from there to the open meadows. Excuse me. When they looked back towards the valley and the distant Gardner place at the bottom, they saw a fearsome sight. All the farm was shining with a hideous unknown blend of trees, buildings, and even such grass and herbage that had not been wholly changed to that had not been wholly changed to lethal gray bitterness. The burrows were all straining skyward, tipped with tongues of foul flame, and lampet tricklings of the same monstrous fire were creeping around the ridgepoles of the house, barn, and sheds. It was a scene from a vision of Fuseli, I think, and over all the rest reigned that riot of luminous amorphousness, that alien and dimensioned rainbow of cryptic poison from the well, seething, feeling, lapping, reaching, scintillating, straining, and malignantly bubbling in its cosmic and unrecognizable chromasm. Then, without warning, the hideous thing shot vertically up towards the sky like a rocket or meteor, leaving behind no trail and disappearing through a round and curviously regular hole in the clouds before any man could grasp or cry out. No watcher can ever forget that sight, and Ami stared blankly at the stars of CYG and US, whichever that star is, how you pronounce it. Cygnus, I think, maybe? Anyway. Deneb twinkled above the others, where the unknown color had melted into the Milky Way. But his gaze was the next moment called swiftly to earth by the crackling in the valley. It was just that, only a wooden ripping and crackling, not an explosion, as so many others of the party vowed. Yet the outcome was the same. For one feverish kaleidoscope instant, there burst up from that doomed Necursus farm a gleaming eruptive cataclysm of unnatural sparks and substance, blurring the glance of the few who saw it, and sending forth to the zenith a bombarding cloud dust of such colored and fantastic fragments as our universe must needs disown, I guess. Though quickly reclosing vapors, they followed the great morbidity that had vanished, and in another second had vanished too. Behind and below was only a darkness to which the men dared not return, and all about was a mounting wind which seemed to sweep down in black foregust from interstellar space. It streaked and hollowed and lashed the fields and disordered woods in a mad cosmic frenzy. Though soon the trembling party realized it would be no use waiting for the moon to show what was left down there at Nahim's. Oh, my neck. Okay. Too awed even to hint theories, the seven shaking men tugged back toward Arkham by the North Road. Ami was worse than his fellows and begged them to see him inside his own kitchen instead of keeping straight on to town. He did not wish to cross the nighted, wind-warped woods alone to his home on the main road, for he had an added shock that the others were spared, and was crushed forever with a brooding fear he dared not even mention for many years to come. As the rest of the watchers on that tempestuous hill had stolidly set their faces toward the road, Ami had looked back an instant at the shadowed valley of dissolution so lately sheltered his ill-starred friend, and from that stricken, faraway spot he had seen something feebly rise, only to sink down again upon the place from which the great shapeless horror had shot into the sky. It was just a color, but not any color of our earth or heavens. And because Ami recognized that color and knew that his last and knew that this last faint remain must still be lurking down there in the well, he has never been quite right since. Ami would never go near the place again. It is over half a century now since the horror happened. Is it? 2, 3. Yeah, the 30s would be there, so yeah. It is over half a century since the horror happened, but he still has never been there, and will be glad when the new reservoir blots it out. I shall be glad too, for I do not like the way the sunlight changed color around the mouth of the abandoned well I passed. I hope the water will always be very deep, but even so, I shall never drink it. I do not think I shall ever visit Arkham County hereafter. Arkham Country. Country, okay. Because I still think it's Miskatonic County. I know some people like to call it Lovecraft County or Lovecraft Country, but Miskatonic County actually sounds like a legitimate name for the county. Anyway, hereafter. 3 of the men who had been with Ami returned the next morning to see the ruins by daylight, but there were not any real ruins. Only the bricks of the chimney, the stones of the cellar, some mineral and metallic liner here and there, and the rim of that nefarious well. Save for Ami's dead horse, which they towed away and buried, and the buggy, which they shortly returned to him, everything that had ever been living had gone. 5 eldritch arches of dusty gray desert 5 eldritch acres of dusty gray desert remained, nor has anything ever grown there since. To this day it sprawls open to the sky, like a great spot eaten by acid in the woods and fields, and the few who have ever dared glimpse it, in spite of the ritual tales, have named it the Blasted Heath. The ritual tales are strange. They may even be stranger if city men and college chemists could be interested enough to analyze the water from that disused well, or the gray dust that no wind seems ever to disperse. Botanists too ought to study the stunted flora around on the borders of that spot, for they might shed light on the country notion that the blight is spreading little by little, perhaps an inch a year. People say that the color of the neighboring herbage is not quite right in the spring, and that wild things leave strange footprints in the light winter snow. Snow never seems quite so heavy on the Blasted Heath as it is everywhere else. Horses, the few that are left in this motor age, grow skittish in the silent valley, and hunters cannot depend on their dogs too near the splotch of grayish dust. They say the mental influences are very bad too. Numbers went strange in the years after Nahim's taking, and always they lacked the power to get away. Then the stronger-minded folk all left the region, and only the foreigners tried to live in the crumbling old homesteads. They could not stay, though, and one sometimes wonders They cannot stay, though, and one sometimes wonders what insight beyond ours their wild, weird stories of whispered magic have given them. Their dreams at night, they protest, are very horrible in that grotesque country, and surely the very look of the dark realm is enough to stir morbid fancy. No traveler has ever escaped a sense of strangeness in those deep ravines, and artists shiver as they paint thick woods whose mystery is as much of a spirit as of the eye. I myself am curious about this sensation I derived from my lone walk before Ami told me his tale. When twilight came, I had vaguely wished some clouds would gather, for an odd timidity about the deep sky about the deep sky voids above had crept into my soul. Do not ask me for my opinion. I do not know. That is all. There was no one but Ami to question, for Arkham people will not talk about the strange days, and all three professors who saw the meteor and its colored globule are dead. There are other globules. There were other globules, depend upon that. One must have fed itself and escaped, or must have, yeah, fed itself and escaped, and probably there was another which was too late. I doubt no doubt it is still down the well. I know there was something wrong with the sunlight I saw above that miasmal brink. The rustics say the bright creeps an inch a year, so perhaps there is a kind of growth of nourishment even now. But whatever demon hatchling is there, it must be tethered to something, or else it would quickly spread as it fastened to the roots of the trees that claw the air. One of the current Arkham tales is about fat oaks that shine and move as they ought not to at night. What is it? What it is, only God knows. In terms of matter, I suppose the thing Ami described would be called a gas. But this gas obeyed laws that are not of our cosmos. This was no fruit of such worlds and suns as shine on the telescopes and photographic plates of our observatories. This was no breath from the skies whose motions and dimensions our astronomers measure or deem too vast to measure. It was just a color out of space, a frightful messenger from uninformed realms of infinity beyond all nature as we know it, from realms whose mere existence stuns the brain and numbs us with the black extracosmic gulfs it throws open before our frenzied eyes. I doubt very much if Ami consciously lied to me, and I do not think his tale was all a freak of madness as the town folk have forewarned. Something terrible came to the hills and valleys on that meteor, and something terrible, though I do know not what portent still remains. I shall be glad to see the water come. Meanwhile, I hope nothing will happen to Ami. He saw so much of the thing, and its influence was so insidious. Why, he has never been able to move away? How clearly he recalled the dying words of Nahim's, "Can't get away. Draws you. You know something coming, but can't do no use." Ami's such a good old man. When the reservoir gang gets to work, I must write the chief engineer to keep a sharp watch on him. I would hate to think of him as the gray, twisted, brittle monstrosity which persists more and more in troubling my sleep. That's the end of it. I both like that one and don't like it. Honestly, the Doom that came to what was it called? Because I remember Lost Carcosa, but not the Doom that came to Sarnath. That one is that one's interesting. That was really interesting. I have theories about that one as well, since that one's not explicitly stated about stuff, and same with this one. But so this one, what I think happened at least is that this is like some kind of parasitic life form almost. That it's like eating off of everything, and that when it escaped, it left something purposefully. It wasn't something that like went up on purpose, or it was like part of the velocity of it sent it up, but not enough to like let it go up all the way, but that it came back down. And that it's going to feed, it's going to grow, it's going to go up itself as well, and then a part of it's going to go back down. Like it's going to also get sent up but go back down. It's going to keep doing that and just keep feeding over and over again and continue growing the Blasted Heath. That's my thought on it. And also that it probably spreads quicker through water, so the reservoir is like the worst fucking thing you could possibly do. but that's never confirmed, and probably not, maybe not the case. I don't know, because yeah, I don't know, but it is interesting. Um, but yeah. Also, was it the doom that came to Sarnath? That one's part of the dream cycle, if I remember correctly. So it's not like even wait, is it? I can't remember if it's part of the dream cycle or if it's like supposed to be an ancient history thing, because it could be either. But that one I also have a very cool theory on it, because I realized something from the beginning and the end is a bit strange, and it might work together, and I don't know. But yeah, if anyone made it to the end of this one, what do you think about my little hypothesis about the what the color is? Because I think it's a parasite thing. Um, but also, like, what you thought about this whole thing? Because I might do another one of these. But yeah, like, leave a comment if you want to see more, because I'd still like to do more. This was a mess near the end, though. I was tired. I'm doing this very late at night. It is literally almost 11 o'clock right now. So I'm tired. But yeah. You can hear me just tapping my book right now. Let me just move this out of the way. Okay. So yeah, that's gonna be it for me today. Thanks for joining me on this adventure. I've never, like, consistently read out loud that long, and definitely, like, we're gonna need to do shorter stories for a little bit. I need to, like, get up to that point. Now, what I might do is read, like, a smaller story every once in a while, like, while I'm doing other streams, maybe? I don't know. I think you guys maybe should decide that, but I'm also, like, probably still gonna do, like, maybe one more of these at the very least, because I did set up all of this background, and I'd like to keep this. But, I think that's it for now. Thanks for joining, guys. Sayonara, Terina.